OK, welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to this session. How many of you have been in my yesterday session? Just a few? OK. That's what I expect, because the theme was totally different. So this session is about Power BI for developers. I expect most of this room, majority of this room, to be developers. Not all of you, but even if you are not developers, this session will give you some understanding about what type of things you can do in development experience working with Power BI. So before the start, I like to give you a little bit of warning. This session has a lot of coding and scripting in it. So if you are scared from coding and scripting, you are more than welcome to play with your mobile phone, those kind of things. But I will show you some coding and scripting, a lot of demos. How many of you have been in yesterday Aviv session about Power BI for developers? Just few. OK, so the yesterday session of Aviv was mainly about what you can do with Power BI, embedded Power BI for developers experience. My session is mostly about how to do that thing. So I'll be showing mainly demos. So most of you have probably heard about a lot of things in Power BI embedded world, JavaScript API, REST API. You might be confused what are all of these things is about. So this is the right session if you're confused with all of those things. After this session, you might think that you will have some clear ideas. So you won't be mind blown after this session. I promise you, I'll just make it as clear as possible. We will have about 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. So feel free to ask any questions if you have any questions at the end. A little bit about me. I'm Reza Rad, Microsoft Data Platform MVP, about 7 years now, based in New Zealand, Auckland, New Zealand. Not Auckland, which you call it. I think in the States, they call it Auckland in New Zealand. But we call it Auckland in New Zealand. Anyway, that's further down near the South Pole somewhere. I've written some books, also a Power BI free book, which is 900+ pages, absolutely free. You can download it and use it. These are my contact information. I'm doing consulting and training on Power BI and a lot of Microsoft BI technologies. And these are my contact information. Feel free to reach me any questions if you have after the session. So agenda of today, pretty much demos, but I'll go very quickly into an introduction to Power BI. I believe everyone knows what Power BI is here. Then I'll show you 3 different demos of that. I'll show you first one demo of how you can embed a content into Power BI, how you can use REST API to do some stuff like, for example, refreshing a data set, how you can access through gateways. These are totally new features, and how you can actually use REST API for pushing some data rows into your data set online. So that goes through a lot of demos. Starting with introduction to Power BI, everyone knows what Power BI is. Power BI is a self-service tool for doing cloud service BI, and it provides its own service. You log into Power BI service, you have your reports and dashboards there. What we are covering in this session is bringing those content into your application or having your application somehow working with that content, right? So it's the whole development experience with that Power BI content. Opportunities for developers. When you are a developer, what you can do with Power BI. There are 4 main opportunities for developers to work with Power BI. Sometimes you might want to build a custom visual. There was a couple of sessions about building custom visuals in this conference, if you have been there. It's a totally JavaScript experience, CSS3 experience. You need to be a really good web developer to do that. It's not hard. It is time-consuming. In this session, we are not covering that, because that's absolutely a different scenario to talk about. That takes a whole session itself to talk about. The other development opportunity with Power BI is embedding a Power BI content into your application. This can be a SharePoint application on-premises you are using. This can be SharePoint Online, which is somehow built-in supported. Or it can be a web application that your web developer or yourself, you are creating that for your organization, and you are using that for embedding Power BI content. That is something that we will talk about today. It is using a JavaScript API. The next development opportunity is that you can actually control Power BI through your application. For example, in Power BI, you are limited, even with Power BI Pro, you are limited to refresh your data set 8 times a day. But I show you today that you can refresh it every second, every minute. There is no limitation if you connect with your application, with your C# application or something like that. You can write a simple application that refreshes your data set every minute. Really easy. Aviv. Aviv is Microsoft product manager of all of these things that I'm talking about. Any questions comes here. That goes to Aviv. So I'll show you how that works. And the other one is creating custom connectors. If you have been in Matt Mason's session earlier today, he explained how custom connectors are useful, how you can create custom connectors with Power BI. That's actually extending the ability to connect to many other data sources that you might have, right? So that I won't touch today. So these two I won't touch today. I won't talk about extending with creating custom visuals. I won't talk about creating custom connectors. These two are totally separate, but there was sessions about those. So I encourage you to watch those sessions later. Today, I will talk about embedding Power BI content and also using API to refresh data set, to do some working with Power BI component through an application. OK, what is REST API? REST API is an API in Power BI that you can work from your application with this API and connect to your Power BI reports, dashboards, data sets, work with those. This REST API has been developed, I think, first time more than a year ago. And it was a really good start of development of that. Then after a while, there has been two different sides of that. Some more enhancement went on another side called Power BI Embedded, another side which was a REST API. So those has been actually both kind of APIs, but just different naming, different plans. Now they are all together one single API that actually cover everything. So we will go through that. This single API gives you the power to embed content into Power BI, into your application. This gives you ability to refresh your data set, to connect through gateways, change the data source of your gateway, change the username, create a new data set, create a new table, add data rows to it. You can do almost anything you want with your REST API. So the REST API that I'll show you today is version 2 of the REST API. It is already general available, I believe. So I'll show you how to use it. So the first part of my talk is about embedding Power BI content into an app. OK, when you want to integrate Power BI content into an app, there are two different ways of that. Sometimes you have your users who are actually Power BI users and want to use those content. Sometimes your users are not Power BI users, and you want to give them access to your Power BI content. So these two different paths has two different ways of working with that. So, one of them is with a token, another one is without a token. I'm not talking about with a token approach in this talk. I will focus more on creating that. I'm not talking about without the token. I mainly talk about how to create that with a token. So what that means you have created some Power BI report content, and you want to share it with audience, and your audience might not have Power BI user at all, right? So you just create your application, embed your content in there, and you give them your application username and password. They log into your application, and they will see your Power BI reports and content. And the licensing plan of that is different from the per-user licensing of Power BI. So they don't need to pay $10 per user per month, right? So that's with a token. So what you need to do for that approach, you have three main steps to go through that. First, you have to register your application. I'll show you how to do that. Then you have to get the content that you want to embed, and then you have to embed it into your application. Three main steps. Normally, you do that, especially to get the content and embed the content together. I'll show you separately one by one. So first one is how to actually register your app. So it's a website, dev.powerbi.com/apps. you can simply go there, a very simple interface. You can register your app here. When you are creating an application, you are creating an app, right? So you should register that app. I'll just register it with my account. I put a name for this app. Let's say MDIS 2017 demo app. You can choose it. Is it server-side web app or native app? What is the difference? Server-side is like a web application, mobile application sometimes. Native app is mainly similar to, let's say, I have a console application on my machine that is working. But that said, if you want to create an application that is working for Power BI users that do not actually have a Power BI account, it needs to be native app as well. Right? So I'll choose a native app. And you need to specify a URL. This is a redirect URL. It's not that much important, but you put it here. I'll just set something here. And this is the important part. You need to specify access to this, this app to actually your Power BI content. Right? This app, by default, doesn't have any access to your Power BI account, except you give it access. For example, I want this app to be able to read all reports, dashboards, and read and write reports. You might want to actually have some data sets, API things as well. So you have to actually specify what you want in this app to be. So you just select those stuff, and you register. When you register your app, you will have a client ID. This is important. You need this client ID to be able to embed the content or work with your Power BI content through this app. So you are actually authorizing this app to work with your Power BI content. Okay? So that's the first step, registering the app. But when you register the app, there are two ways. One way, this was the easy way that I showed you, dev.powerbi.com/apps. The other way is that you can go to Azure Portal. And in the Azure Portal, App Services, sorry, Azure Active Directory, I think. I'll go back to Azure Active Directory. So in Azure Portal, Azure Active Directory, app registrations, you can even create a new application registration right from here, right? But that's more friendly to create that in that interface. The one that I just created, you can see it right now here, right? MDIS demo app. Each app has some permissions, so you can go to the permission section. It's a list of permissions, which you can click on those permissions and see what this app can do. For example, it cannot view groups at the moment, or it cannot, for example, do some of the stuff. So if you want to authorize this thing, just select that thing. When you select it, it's a little bit tricky here. When you select it here, then you might think, OK, I save, and it would be fine. You have to save, but you have to also do this grant permission as well. So it's a little bit tricky. So you have to do grant permission and that together to grant your application to be to have permission to do those kind of things, right? OK, so that's the behind the scene how your application can be authorized. Let's say the application is registered now, and I want to bring it into a web page and embed those content. So the first demo that I have here is ASP.NET MVC application, similar to a normal ASP.NET application, a little bit more structured in terms of the way that it works with MVC design pattern. So I have a web.config page here. In my web config page, I have a bunch of information. For example, I have the client ID. This is the same client ID that you get from your registration application, right? So you should put that over here. These codes are already available in the in public websites. There are links at the end of this slide, so you can download it. Not exactly those demos that I'm showing to you, but there are samples for working with this REST API, right? So you need to put your client ID here. Client secret for this example is not required. That's for server-side applications. We are not talking about that. Native application is this the example. So you put your client ID. The rest is pretty much, I would say, basic. Not basic, I mean generic. Like, for example, authority URL or resolve URL, API URL. All of these are talking with Power BI API URLs, which you don't need to change it. Okay, so when I want to embed this content into a Power BI, I'll just show you how does it look first, and then I'll explain the code behind of it. So it's an application that has some web forms in it. One of the web forms is embedding a report. So you can see embed report, embed dashboard, embed tile. So I'll go through embed report. And it's simply a go through a group that I have in my Power BI account, a workspace. In this workspace, I have only one report, so it's loading that report over here. So you can see that this is report loaded inside my application. So it's a web page. I have the report inside that web page. And it is interactive report like anything else in Power BI, quite interactive. And as a user, when I connect to this report, when I actually open this page, I see that content, no matter am I a Power BI user or not, right? So handling the security then is your job or your web developer job to create security roles, permissions in your application, which Aviv showed an example yesterday, and have different pages visible for different people so they see their Power BI content, right? OK, so how does it work? It has also an example of embedding dashboard as well. I'll show you embed dashboard and embed tile. You can embed any of these. So embed dashboard or embed tile, these are new. These was not possible before. So it's a new feature that you can do with this embedding now. So how does all of these things work? I'll go to the code behind of this. So it's an MVC application. It has a view section. So embed report is an CHTML page, similar to normal HTML page with some ASP.NET MVC coding on it. I'm not going that much into the details of that. There is a JavaScript section for that. Apart from this JavaScript section, everything else is just a normal application, normal web application with web content in it. What this JavaScript does, this JavaScript section actually brings the Power BI content into this section. And because of, for doing that thing, it needs a token. That token is important. So how that token works, I'll go one step before this, how we, at the very first, connect to Power BI through the REST API. So you have to download the REST API first. You can go to Tools, Nugget Package Manager, and you can browse for Power BI.api. And you will see that that's the version 2 that I'm talking about. So you just select it, and you will have it. So that's how easy it is to get the API. You will need some other references as well. For example, one of the other things that you need is Microsoft.identity model.clients.active directory to be able to work with. But if you download these samples, these are all built in that sample. You can start building on the copy of that. So what is the process? You have the DLLs and references for Power BI API, and you want to work with, right? So I have these APIs. The first step is to authorize from this application to work with Azure. Every application who wants to work with Azure needs to go through an authentication process. This authentication process has 2 steps. First, getting authorization code, and second, having a token code to work with, right? So, for example, I have a web application here on my machine. This web application wants to connect to Power BI content, which is part of an Azure content. So I have to create an I have to actually access through an authorization code or authentication code. So these lines are doing that. I'm not going to explain every single line. What is the section behind that line? And after that, I will get a token. I have a slide that explains that process of the token, but I'm not going through all of these flow. It's a lot of talking if I want to go through that. But that's basically the way to connect from your application to Power BI content, right? And basically, in your code, it's just few lines of code. So these 3 lines of code are actually creating authentication, and it gives me an access token. This access token should be then used in every single message that I send to Power BI for getting data, for interacting with that Power BI. So that's access token that you need everywhere. OK, so once I have that access token, then I will actually create a new object of Power BI client. And with this object, I have a lot of actually features here. Like, for example, one is if I zoom in on this one, you can see I can get list of all reports in a group, as an example. So what is this group? This is the group that I'm working at the moment. It's a workspace here, or called group. This workspace has a name. These are friendly names. These are not names that Power BI contents are actually identified by that. For every object that you have in Power BI, there's a GUID, GUID, code, and there's a name. We know those based on names here, right? You see dataset names, table names, a workspace name, report names, but these are just display labels, right? When you are working with REST API, don't think about these names. These have IDs. So I have a group ID. How you can understand your group ID? These are very simple. You can see that at the top of your Power BI section. So I'm in this group now. This is actually my group ID, right? Or you can get list of all groups and loop through that, those kind of stuff. OK, so I'll go to that application. I'm getting list of all reports there. From that list of all reports, I'm getting the first one. Or you might know which report you are looking for, and you have the ID for that, so that's absolutely fine. OK, so I'm getting the first one, and out of that first one, then I'm creating an embed code, which has the authorization, and it has access, view access on that report. I'm creating an embed content and passing that through the web page. So this web page over here, now embedding that. So this is for embedding TAL, embedding report if I go. This is embedding that report into the web page. So this is this JavaScript part is the part that you need to put in your HTML page, and that C# code is the code that you need to put to get the report that you want and embed it into your report. As I said, I'm not going through every single line of this, but later on, if there's any questions, I will go through that. So as a result, what happens when I run this, when I go to embed report, I'm able to see my report over there. Or if I go to embed dashboard, I will be able to go to embed dashboard or embed TALs. These are the only difference of these are that you go to the REST API usage. So for example, that was for embedding report, and the function that I used was was clients.reports.getReports. This one, on the other hand side, is client dashboards that get the dashboard, right? Or for the TALs, you need to first get the dashboard and then loop through TALs in that dashboard. So it's another one. So you first get the dashboard, and then this part, which is get TALs in that group and dashboard, right? So for example, when I want to get TALs in a group and dashboard, what I'll specify as an input, group ID and dashboard ID. When I want to get list of dashboards in a group, what I specify is just the group ID. And there are heaps of functions here that you can use. So for example, if I click on this section, you can see a lot of functions here that you can use for dashboards, reports, and TALs. So that's how easy it is to embed your Power BI content into an application. So I can take one question and then go to the next step. Any questions so far? Yes?
So low-level security. I've done Power BI embedded before.
Yep.
The issue's always been with low-level security where I want to do filtering based on somebody's membership role.
Yeah.
What I'm finding is that REST APIs don't have a way that I can automatically create roles. I have to create those roles in my Power BI report manually.
OK, so I'll repeat the question for case of recording. So you want to use role-level security in Power BI, and you want to know, does Power BI REST API support creating those roles from the API or not? Yes. Yeah, that's static role-level security. The API, I'm not 100% sure if it works with role. Yeah, I think it doesn't. Yeah, you cannot create roles from this API, but it works with a report that you have, which has role-level security, static role-level security, not dynamic at the moment. Yeah. Yeah. So I can tell you that Power BI team will be working on it. OK, that was a very good question, very good feedback. Thank you. OK, the next part. So I went through all of these things. Also, if you want to see what type of things you can do with this REST API, there's an example page for this. If I click on it, somehow a click doesn't work. I'll just open it over here. It's a page that you can use. It's a demo page. You can use it very user-friendly. You can use it for embedding sample report, sample dashboard, sample tall. Let's say I want to look at embed sample report. OK, I'll click on it. And this gives you the code. So that's the code, the JavaScript code. You remember in that page? This is the code, right? So if I want to see how it works, I just click on Run. And down below here, it will embed that Power BI report into here. It's a sample Power BI report. It's not my Power BI report. It's a Power BI report that somebody created. So if you want to embed a report, then that's your code. OK? The very good thing is that you can even create an edit mode here. That means you can have your application to be your self-service environment to work with your report. So as you can see, the code changed a little bit when I click on Edit. There's a little bit of change here. I think one of the modes changed to be Edit. Yep, here it is. So the view mode is Edit. Now, in my application, inside my web application, I'm able to create a report. I'm able to change my report, right? So I don't need to go to Power BI website at all. I'm changing it right away here. So then you can create a role in your application and say this role is editor. When that role logs in, then you change that mode to be edit, and that role can edit the report, right? It's a lot of things that you can do here. Create mode, so you can create a report directly from there. There are a lot of interactions things as well. So for example, if you want to see what you can do with in terms of pages, event of pages, for example, set filters. So these are examples of that, how you can work with that, get filters. It's a lot of actually examples, interactions here. Very good source of getting the code, getting the first sketch of your code and putting it into your application and start working with that. OK, and this is the link is also provided at the reference slide, so you can download it. All of the slides is already available in the website. If it is hard to download it from there, it will be available in my blog as well right after this. OK, so what is the benefits of embedded? We call it still embedded, but it's kind of REST API at the moment. So what is the benefit of embedding content into a Power BI benefits? It's a lot. Actually, you are bringing Power BI into your application. Before that, if you have been a Power BI, if you have been a web developer, you have used a lot of other reporting technologies to create your report, or you might just use your web grid style, some kind of reporting to create that. Now you can have powerful Power BI reports inside your application. The other thing is that you can have security roles all managed by your application. There's no limitation. You can give access to people. Licensing of that is different, though. I don't have a slide for licensing, but if you go to YouTube and watch Aviv's session yesterday, it had information about licensing of this plan as well. There are different SKUs that you can go through that. So licensing is not per user anymore. You can share it with everyone you like. So those users might not be even in your organization. As long as you are giving them access to your web application, they are able to see your content, right? But with the current Power BI service, if you want to share the content with someone totally outside of your organization, you have to go through some Azure Azure B2B processes, those kind of things. So very useful and powerful feature is embedding Power BI content into your application. The other thing I want to talk about are two different things: push data and refresh data. Let me first talk about refresh data, because push data, lots of people already have seen that. So refresh data. REST API, the new one, the version 2 of that, has a lot of new functionality in it, which I'll show you some of those. You can get list of gateways. You can loop through gateways, get list of data source under that gateway. You can even change the credential of a gateway data source. You can refresh a data set. So let me show you some of the examples here. So it's, again, another MVC application, but this can be a console application as well. It can be a Windows service. It doesn't need to be an application that is MVC. It can be any type of application. OK, what I want to show you in this example is that if I go to another workspace, so this is another workspace. Oh, sorry. Let me go back to the first workspace to show you the refresh first. So I'll go back to the first workspace. In this workspace, I have a data set. So you can see this is my data set. And the last refresh time of this data set was 13th of June. What is today? 13th of June? But this is the New Zealand time that I refreshed it, I think. Anyway, that time is already passed. So if I refresh it now, I should be able to see that it is refreshed, right? This is connected through a gateway. So let me first check if my gateway is up and running. On-premises gateway running, yep, OK. So that should be fine. Now I'll go to my application, and I have a refresh section here. I'll click on refresh. And what it does, it will kick refresh that data set, that particular data set, and embed that report here again. Embedding, you have seen that already. Here, now you can see that this is already refreshed. Right? So through your application, you can refresh data set. Is there a limitation? No. Are you only, do you only can refresh it 8 times a day? No, you can refresh it as much as you like. The good thing about this is automation. You have an ETL process running somewhere. After ETL process, you want to refresh your data set, right? Not having this scheduled, right? So you can have a small console application. After ETL, just run that application, and that refresh the data set. Very easy, very useful. And you can also track errors or things like that that happens. It's not just kicking refresh and a black box. You don't see anything. You will see the refresh history of your data set. You can see, is it failed at some stage or not. Let me show you the code behind of that. As I said, it's all going through one code, one actually REST API. So I have 2 projects. Not sure which one is it. I'll close the first one. OK, the second one. So this application over here, which was for refreshing data set, I'll go to the refresh section. So same thing. We need to first do the authentication, get the token, access token, and create a Power BI client object. After that, then here is the first part that is changed. So I'm getting a list of all data sets with just dataset.getDatasets in group, right? So in that group, I'm getting a list of all datasets. Let me put a breakpoint here and show you what you will see. So I'll go through that part very quickly again. Refresh. Now I'm in this section. So if I go through next step, now I have a list of datasets. And I have only one data set, because in my group over here, I just have one data set, right? And that data set, is this one, which if I go to the next step, this is the data set. You can see the name. Oops, sorry. It just went out very quickly. Doesn't work with the zooming. So I can click on this data set, expand it, and you can see this is exactly that name of data set, and this is the ID of that data set. Remember that GUID, GUID? So very easy. You can actually loop through those data sets. So once I have that data set, then it's a very simple function here now. So that's the function. Refresh data set in group. You just specify group ID and data set ID. Right? That's it. All you need to do, and very simply working. You have access. You have some other functions that give you the refresh history, a lot of other things as well. So let me show you some other stuff, like gateways and stuff. So let me go through this breakpoint. So I'll go back to some other operations. So for example, in my Power BI account, I'll go to setting or manage gateways to show you how many gateways I have in my Power BI account. I have 3 gateways in my Power BI account. 2 of them is turned off at the moment, not running. You see this exclamation mark. 1 of them is running, absolutely working fine. So when I'm in my Power BI REST API, I can simply get list of all of these gateways. Now you can see I have 3 gateways over here. First one is BI Redacat. Right? Second one, second one is BI Demo Gateway. Third one is something else. So I have access to all of those gateways, and I can see even data sources under that gateway, for example. So I want to access through data source, one of the data source in one of those gateways. I'll get the first gateway as an example. I pass through the ID of that gateway, and I'll get the data source under that gateway. So what is that data source name? So the data source, I have 3 data sources under that gateway. This is the first gateway that I have 3 data sources on it. And here you can see these are 3 data sources, right? I'm getting the first data source in that list, right? So that would be the next step. Oh, sorry, I already passed that. But this is the first data source, AdventureWorks DW 2014. What is the type of that data source? It's a SQL data source. What is the credential? Windows credential. If you want to change the connection details, there are functions that you can change the connection details. There are a lot of functions that you can work through this and do whatever you want, right? So that's another functionality. And the other one, the last one, is push data. So that was about REST API, some refresh functions, and data source. So before going to push API, we can go for one more question. Any questions? Yes? You mean if you have a Power BI, I'll just want to understand your question. So you have a Power BI report, and it's connected to a data source. Apart from the gateway, is there any other types of connection?
So I'm using Power BI Embedded, and
yes.
It's right now bound to direct queries only.
Yeah, so that's
the other way,
yeah.
rather than just direct queries.
So that's a great question. I probably need to mention that before. So the question is that right now I have Power BI Embedded. I'm using Power BI Embedded on a live connection or direct query connection. Can I use it with gateway or any other data sources? So that's the old Power BI Embedded. This new embedding way, you can have any types of data sources. As long as Power BI Service supports it, you can embed it here. So the example that you've seen, that report was not with Azure SQL Database or a direct query. That was a report with the gateway, and it was working absolutely fine, right? So you have no limitation in terms of, so you might have a report working on an Excel file on premises with the gateway connection and embed that into your application. That works absolutely fine.
But you had gateway service running on your machine. Do you still need to have gateway?
So the question, you have a gateway running on your machine. Do we still need the gateway? I needed the gateway to refresh that data set. So because my data set is bound to that gateway, right? So otherwise, if it is not going through gateway, no, you don't need it. That then means that you are using Azure SQL Database or any other types of connection. But if you are, like this example, it was an Excel file on my machine. Because I want to refresh that data set, I need that gateway to create that connection for me. So for the time of refreshing, that gateway should be up and running. OK? So I'll go through the last part, and then we'll go. Yeah. Can you please repeat?
You can't refresh your data unless you're using a gateway.
Question. You cannot refresh your data unless you are using gateway, right? Not particularly. So I might have a report that is connected to Azure SQL Database, direct query connection. So that's direct query connection. Or it might be import data from Azure SQL Database, right? That doesn't need gateway. I can refresh it. There's no problem. I only need gateway if the connection goes through gateway, right? Like the normal Power BI. If it works through gateway, gateway is required. Otherwise, it's not required. OK, I'll go through the last part very quickly. And then if there's any other questions, we'll go through that. OK, so the last part is using Power BI for real time, pushing data through REST API. You might have seen demos of that that has been for some months in different channels. There has been a lot, not a lot, a few changes in this part as well. So as an example, let's say I have another workspace. So this is the workspace for that. And I have a data set here, which is a hybrid data set or push streaming data set. How many of you have been in a series session about live streaming with Power BI? Anyone? OK. Just a few, so I'll explain that very quickly. So in Power BI, you can have different types of data set. One data set is all these types of data set that you import data into it, and you use that as a source of Power BI report. Another type of data set is a streaming data set, which you don't actually store data in it. It's just data is streaming through it, and you visualize that into a dashboard, right? Another type of data set is push streaming data set. Push streaming data set means that it is streaming, and it is also storing some data in it as well, right? It's a lot of discussion in terms of how these data sets works, what are differences between these. I'm not going through explaining that. We don't have that much time. But I want to show you one of these examples. So if you want to create a streaming data set, you can simply go to create streaming data set in your group or whatever. There are 3 types of streaming. Streaming with REST API, which I will be focusing now. Streaming with PubNub, which is an open source service. I'm not talking about that. Streaming with Azure Stream Analytics, which I'm not talking about Azure Stream Analytics as well. If you have been in Leila's session, Leila showed how to do that with Raspberry Pi streaming through Azure Stream Analytics and Power BI. So I'm doing the API. So I'll just select API. You can put a name for your data set. This is an awesome data set. You can put values here. For example, you can say, OK, I have a date time field called, I don't know, timestamp or whatever. And I have sales amount, something, I don't know. Or temperature if it is coming from a sensor, and that's of number. You can add as many as fields you want. And this will automatically show you a JSON format that needs to be submitted through this data set to have a new data point available for this data set, right? So you can easily create that. If you want your data set to be push streaming, that means streaming and storing data, you can turn that on. If you just want to stream, you don't want to store data, you can turn it off. So I'll just select one of these, create, and that's almost it. So it will give you push URL and this section, and done. Now, if I refresh this area, I should see 3 data sets. Over here, yeah. So you can see I have created the data set. So that's how you create data set. You can even create this data set from REST API, right? So you shouldn't create it here. You can create it from the REST API. Now, what I want to show you is how can I add new data points to this data set. I won't do that for this data set. I just do that for another data set. So this is the data set that I'm working at the moment. It has, it's similar to the data set that we've created before. I have a dashboard on top of this data set. I'll go to that dashboard. And these are history of what I've done. I think 8 p.m. yesterday was the last time I've done some work with it. So I'll go and this time add some new data points over for this one. OK, so push data. And if everything goes fine, now I should see some new data points coming here. In that line chart, you see those lines coming in because I said only show that for last 60 seconds or last 1 minute. So new data points coming every single second in that data set. How that works? It's again with the same API. Everything goes through that API. One API ruled them all. OK, so that's in this area over here, which I first get the data set. And the code for creating data set is also kind of remarked over here, but you can see how you can create a data set as well. Now I want to push a data into that. So I will create a data entry, for example. My data entry is a timestamp, which I specify the time for now, and a random number. And then for passing that, I'm using a very simple function here, which is datasets that post rows in group, because it is in group. If it wasn't in group, post rows, right? And you specify group, dataset, and the object that you have created for the data point. And that will pass information here, and you can see that how it is working, right? So if you have an application that want to push data into Power BI, this is a way to go. This is a little bit different from refreshing dataset. You can still have your dataset to be refreshed as well. But you might want to have some data there and just add new data points. We call it push streaming, things like that. OK, so with saying that, that was the whole part of my session. I'll just go to a very wrap up before going to the question part. So REST API, benefits of that, you can automate your Power BI application. You can refresh whatever time you want. You can put it at the end of your application. You have access to Power BI without any limits. Your limit is actually Power BI. As much as Power BI limited, you are limited though as well. But in your application, you can work with refresh dataset. You can get refresh history. You can access to all gateways. You can do whatever you want. You can add analytics into your portal, into your application. You can use your application as the main portal of Power BI. It's totally different licensing plan. It's a lot of benefits in that. In summary, I just focused on 2 different developer opportunities. As I said at the beginning, there are 2 others as well. You can extend with creating new custom visuals, and you can create new custom connectors. So make sure that you have a look at those things as well. And these are references to study more. As I said, the sample project codes, it's not exactly those codes that I'm showing to you here, but it's kind of similar to that. And I will write some blog posts in the next few days that explain that. So we have about 1 minute and 23 seconds. Any questions? We can go to the, yes?
In your last demo that you did, when you chose the option to store the data store,
Yes.
where does it store the data? In Azure?
In the dataset itself. So yeah. Dataset is like, sorry, I repeat question. So the last part that I showed when I said store historical data, which is push and streaming, where it is storing that data inside the dataset itself. When you create a Power BI report and upload it into Power BI, or publish it to Power BI, data is in your dataset. You publish it there, and it is staying there. So that's where it is staying. Any other questions? No other questions? Yes? I believe yes, but confirming. I think there is an, oh, you mean adding tiles into a dashboard? Let me just check. Very good question. So the question is that can we programmatically add a tile into a dashboard? We don't have that. OK. So we don't have that feature yet.
This is something we are starting to do. So
OK, it will be available soon. Great. So if you have still questions, I'm over here. Thank you for attending to the session. Please evaluate the session as well. Thank you.